I like that it gives you some level of control over something that seems like chaos.
Think you practice enough? Pool instructor Garrett Williams tracks every day. Stay tuned to find out how real progress happens, no matter your age or skill level, on this episode of Cue the Experts. Welcome to Cue the Experts, the pool improvement podcast where we dive deep into the minds of players and instructors who have dedicated themselves to mastering the sport. I'm Jeremiah Gage.
I'm Digital Dave.
And I'm Garrett Williams.
Thanks, Garrett. Yeah, today we're joined by Garrett Williams. He's a certified PBIA instructor in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Thanks for joining us, Garrett.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, so we like to kick things off with a bit of a icebreaker question. If pool tables could talk, what do you think yours would say about your game?
Give me a rest. I have a calendar, and every year I set goals for myself as far as practice goes or pool in general. Not goals in my life, but pool goals. And so my calendar this
Good
year,
idea.
I'm going to track every single day that I practice, because I mostly practice almost every day. So far this month, there was one day where I only played 3 racks with a friend, but every other day I've actually done actual practice. And it's nice to be able to look over and see it. And it's a light up calendar where you push each day and it lights up so I can see it from across the room. When I go to bed at night, I look over and I can see all the lights. And any day that I miss, I'm gonna see it for the rest of the year. So it's going to motivate me to keep consistent with my practice.
Well, that's a very neat way to stay motivated.
Yeah, and I've decided, that this year, it's been a few years since I've played consistent tournaments. I took a little bit of time off. It's where I would just play local league, give lessons, and practice and play with friends at home. And so this year I'm going to play in 10 tournaments. There's going to be local events and stuff like that, small things, but I'm going to make sure to play in 10. I've already played in 2, just because I want to build better habits around the process of playing tournaments.
Well, that would be the question is, once you look at that calendar and go, okay, that was only 2 hours a day for 2 weeks, and I can start to see my game kind of fall off on those touch shots or maybe some saves or whatever it is that might be the thing that's going to fall away first. But then you also see it's like, well, I put in a lot of hours 2 weeks in a row, and now I'm really feeling it.
Absolutely.
Getting the stroke a lot better. So it'd be interesting to hear your take on where that kind of measurement is, where you have enough time in, your game doesn't fall.
For me, I do this sort of diligent practice. I've noticed in the past, from watching other players, I see players oftentimes, what they'll do is they'll play a match and they'll miss a shot. And then they do this pantomime where they're mad because they missed the shot. They'll hit the table, they'll make a face, they'll throw their hands up in the air, they'll walk away. And I don't actually believe that they're actually mad that they missed the shot. I think that they probably feel embarrassed that they missed the shot, suspected they might miss the shot, and weren't really all that surprised when they missed the shot. But they're going to play a bully in their head, some soundtrack in their head. Oh, you idiot, you should have made that shot. You knew you were going to miss it. And that takes the responsibility off their shoulders to actually practice and get better. So one of the things that I do is when I'm playing a match or playing in a tournament, if I have an issue and I notice it come up once or more than once, but I remember it, I'll diagram it next to my table and I'll turn it into a drill and I'll practice it for the next couple of weeks. And I don't have to drill it into the ground. I just need to become familiar with, why was that hard for me? What can I do to make it easier? How am I not understanding this particular situation? And if I can do those things, then when I'm actually practicing, instead of just hitting balls like a million hours a week, I'm actually targeting things that I have problems with or things that I know that I want to get better at.
So you can actually learn something
useful.
Your game.
Yeah, learn something about me, learn something about what has happened to me multiple times. And so I have a little piece of paper that I've created for my students, really, but I use it for myself as well, that has 6 pool tables on each side. And I can diagram out what I'm working on, and I can turn it into a drill, and I can make adjustments to it so that I can actually learn where the holes in my game are. Because we all have these holes in the game. Now, you might find sometime that you miss a shot, and then you set it up again and you miss it 10 more times in a row, and it seems easy. But there's something about the angle at which you approach the table or the way you're seeing the balls with that body position that makes it so that you're not seeing it correctly and you're just drilling the ball into the rail over and over again. And if you don't address those holes right away, then you're not aware that they exist. You're not aware that you need to give those shots a little bit more attention, and you're not aware of good ways to practice it.
And I missed 10 times in a row. It's like, well, whatever I'm doing wrong, but I'm doing it consistent, at least.
Absolutely.
Missing it at the same spot all the time.
Yeah.
Sorry, Gage.
Yeah. I was going to say a similar thing. I don't know how many times I'll reset up a shot that I missed, and I'll hit it and I'll miss it exactly the same. And I'm like, oh, I need to adjust my aim. My intuition on that is just a hair off.
Sure.
I need to adjust my intuition, and that's done through just repetition.
Absolutely. And it might even be how you're seeing it. A lot of times players will not be aware that their head is completely off the side of their cue, or that they're actually looking at the pocket when they're shooting that shot, or they've got a head motion that happens because they're turning their shoulder, and the way that they're actually seeing that contact point might not be correct. How many times do you have people who chase the pocket or chase the cue ball, right? So they're shooting the shot and they want to watch where the cue ball goes as it moves, or they have a cut shot and the pocket's over here, and they shoot and then look at the pocket. And that process happens as they stroke the ball. So they're not hitting the ball where they think they are.
I think there's a time element between when you focus on the cue and the cue ball and then your target ball. You're looking at the whole thing, but try to get right on the cue. But as you're shooting the shot, you're actually looking at the object ball.
I am.
There's a time delay from your last check on the cue ball to that next one. And I think if you make that too quick, then you're not going to be comfortable.
Yeah, your eyes are a muscle, and so they take time to contract, and your brain takes time to process the information.
Right.
And it can take quite a lot of time for that to happen. So that distance between those two changes, you need to give yourself time to do it. You can also have a situation where somebody's not sure where to look, because it's not always, not everybody is an object ball person. There are many, many top level players and even instructors and stuff who would consider themselves cue ball people. I'm not one of them. I'm with you about the object ball. But I know Jeremy Jones thinks of himself as a cue ball person. Ronnie O'Sullivan and Mark Williams think of themselves as cue ball people. They're snooker players. So there are top level guys who think of themselves as cue ball. They look at the cue ball last. I'm not sure how they do that, because that's just not how I operate. And so,
you can make anything work.
Different strokes, right?
Yeah.
As long as it's actually functioning. The proof is in the pudding, whether or not you're making the balls or not.
Yeah, but we're looking for the easiest thing for people that aren't dedicating their lives to playing all the time.
And I like those step-by-step, processes.
Yeah, it's definitely fascinating. Let's get into a little bit of your background. So, tell us what attracted you to the sport initially, and what was the spark to become an instructor?
When I was a small child, I must have been 6 or 7. I was very small. I remember my mom took me to a local bar to see her friend's band play, and they had a Valley bar box there in the bar. And I didn't really pay attention to the band, but I remember running around this pool table all night long, dropping the cue ball into the pockets and having it come out the little slot on the end of the table. And it was just mind-blowing. I couldn't believe that you could drop this ball in any of these pockets and they came out the same hole. It was the most amazing thing. And at no point did we drop the balls. I just played with the cue ball all night. And it was like rolling the cue ball around the table. And so I remember that very clearly, and I must have been a very small child.
The felt babysitter.
Yeah, and then my parents bought me a Sega Genesis, I think it was. And as an extra game, they bought me the virtual pool game. And the extra features on it were Lou Butera. And he taught a few shots, he taught a little bit of strategy, but he had this video where he said, "Hi, I'm Machine Gun Lou Butera, and I'm going to run a rack of balls in less than a minute and 30 seconds. And then they had this terrible music, and he just ran out this rack of balls. And as a kid, the first time I saw that, I mean, I still remember to this day, the first time I saw that, it was just amazing. I mean, he was like, sometimes the cue ball went forward, sometimes the cue ball stopped, sometimes the cue ball went back, and he ran out this whole rack of balls. And then, he showed you how to shoot some shots, like he froze an object ball to the end cushion and did the rail first, spinning back into it to cut it in the corner pocket, and had some strategy stuff. And I remember thinking that it was the coolest thing. I used to watch the extra features. I don't really think I ever played the game because it was a terrible game, but I watched the extra features a ton. And so the first time I ever saw a pool table, that I could play on, I was like, I knew that was something I wanted to do. So I'd credit Lou Butera. And I think he did that to a lot of people. I was watching the Tale of Texas Pool the other day, and so one of the players they interviewed there had the same experience, where it was Lou Butera the whole way.
I had no idea he did that. I used to hang at his pool hall in Simi Valley.
And to this day, like those Lou Butera videos are just awesome. They're on YouTube, I'm sure. And it's great. He's like wearing some crazy tuxedo. It's awesome. It's very, very pre-video game. It's shoved into a video game world, but it's a game that I like, that it gives you some level of control over something that seems like chaos, right? I'm a fairly neat person. I like to keep things clean and orderly. I have routines about everything that I do, and it's really nice to break the balls open and then clean them up, break them open and clean them up. And no matter where I go in the world, the table's always flat and the balls are always round. I can go to England. I've played in England. I've played in China. I've played all over the place. I've traveled all over, I do a lot of traveling, and everywhere I go, I play a little pool. I love that I can walk into a pool room anywhere in the world, and within a few minutes, I've got a whole new group of friends.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Through all of that, what was the one thing that you can harken back to that made you want to get better?
When I was a teenager, I started going to the College of Santa Fe, to the dorm there, and I would play on the table in the dorm. So I would go and play on the table in the dorms while I was waiting, and I thought that I knew how to play pool, because I was doing it for a semester or so, and I thought I was getting better. And then a couple of years later, I moved to Boston, and I went out with some friends and we went to a pool room, and I thought I could play, and they just beat me senseless, and it was super embarrassing. And so I started going to the pool room. There was on Lansdowne Street, where Fenway Park is in Boston. Underneath Fenway Park in the basement was a bowling alley and pool hall called Ryan's Family Amusements. During the day, it was $4 an hour to play there. It was the cheapest place in town. So, in the afternoon on my days off, I'd go down there and spend all of my spare money because I wanted to get better at it. I failed at it, and I decided I wanted to improve. Spend all my money trying to get better at this game. And then at some point I went to the Boston Public Library and got Brian's standard book of pool and billiards and read through that and worked out all the shots on the table. And, it'd been a while. People started to see me hang out in there, and they were like, there's a pool hall at the end of the street, and if you get a job there, you can play for free. And so there was a Jillian's at the other end of the street, and they were hiring. So I went down there and I applied for the job. And I was, 19, 20 years old, something like that. And had a mohawk. I was a punk rocker kid. And the guy who interviewed me said, "We can't hire you with that haircut." And I was like, "Can I play pool for free if I get hired?" And he said, "Yeah, totally. Why?" And I'm like, "I'll take care of it." I went home that night and shaved my head bald and came back the next day. And the person who was in charge of the place said, "Buddy, you shaved your head for this job?" And he's like, I gotta hire you. And so I would play every single day, and I would check out pool books from the library and read and study. And, I improved. I got to the point where I could run out a table, but I was not a good pool player. I would say that I've never been talented at pool. I think I love it. But any improvement that I've ever received came through hard work. Which is one of the reasons that I really respect people who aren't naturally gifted at it, but want to get better. And why that's so important to me, helping them, is because I'm definitely a person who needed that help.
We all get bitten by the bug somehow.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it does take a lot of work for those people that aren't naturally talented to really groove in those habits.
Sure.
And especially people that have bad habits or inconsistent habits,
Yeah.
trying to make those more consistent. Yeah, that could be a bit of an effort.
People who have anxiety about performance, like you'll find people who there's so much pressure built in about the execution of the actual shot that moment becomes very difficult to execute. And if they had no pressure at all, if they were by themselves, it might be easy. But they build in all this pressure, and it's a reinforcing cycle of failure and shame and stress that they build into this thing, instead of addressing it kind of in a nuts and bolts, one step at a time kind of way.
Well, I'm a firm believer. If my heart rate didn't rise, then the adrenaline's not there, and I'm not doing it. So I think that's something that people like, how to get smooth when the adrenaline's high, when the heart rate's up, and that's the excitement of it. And so you come away after making that shot or whatever, and you're just like elated and you're relieved, and your heart rate can come back down. And but I think that's part of the hook. It keeps people in it.
It feels good. And it's, it's the scariest thing you can do in the entire world that has zero chance of risk. You feel like you're jumping out of an airplane, but you're standing on 2 feet.
Yeah, there could be some risk if you've put up thousands of dollars.
Don't do. Yeah, that's not for me. I like sure things. I'm very calm,
You probably competed somewhere, Garrett. So
yeah, sure.
What was your biggest accomplishment, with that, and how did it feel?
My biggest accomplishment really is, I've won some tournaments and I've played league, I've gotten MVP lots of times in league and stuff like that. My biggest accomplishments, though, really are helping other people. I have students who have come to me who had been, skill level 2s in the APA for a decade, and within a session or two are skill level 4s and 5s.
That's fantastic.
where they're actually having, emotional problems because they think that it's their fault, and they don't realize that just no one has made it clear to them. And that's really the best thing for me. Like, my favorite is being able to help people improve their game.
So you have a standout student where, something happened like that, or maybe they never played the game and all of a sudden they've got a love for it just because you've made it a little bit simpler for them?
I'm proud of all my students. All of them are working through it and trying to get better. And locally, we have a really friendly pool community of people. We've all known each other for a really long time. That's where most of my students come from, is people who know me and people who've seen me play, and it's people who've seen me teach and help other people. And so it's always a huge compliment to me whenever somebody who knows me as a person asks me to help them with their game, because, it's not like they're picking me out of the phone book.
Do you have age limits to who you're helping?
No, absolutely not. I've taught kids. I've done parent-child lessons where I teach them both at the same time, so that the parent knows what to see in the kid and remembers the things I told them for the kid, so that they can, give them a little encouragement to stay down on the shot or step into the shot, things like that. I have a student who's 84 years old. We've been working together since she was 83. As a child, was not allowed to go into pool rooms. She's actually from Wales in England, so it was snooker rooms. Yeah. But then, as an 83-year-old, she went out and played pool with a friend and realized that she loved it. And now she practices, twice a week for 20 minutes. And we do lessons every month, and she keeps getting better. She's improving, and you have to have different kind of expectations. She doesn't want to compete. She wants to pocket balls better. She wants to understand the game a little bit better. She'd like to make higher runs and have more fun.
What a great story.
We work with her, based on the physical limitations she might have, arthritis, some hip problems, a little bit of back problems. So we create a free shot routine that works comfortably. And that's where you have to meet people at, especially people who aren't planning on being top level players. You need to create something so that the game works for them.
Yeah, exactly. That's the major benefit of having an instructor, getting those one-on-one lessons. And I was going to ask you, we know about your instruction. Do you have anything else going on recently or anything coming up?
I just finished running the Senior Olympics pool tournament. That was super fun. I've run a lot of pool tournaments in the past. I used to do 2 a week, every week for 5 years. But this was 5 tournaments separated by age group, running simultaneously with, I think I had 40 or 50 players. It was super fun. It was absolute chaos, but everything went smoothly. From my point of view, I was doing it by myself. So from my point of view, I had to just stay on my feet all the time, run around, make sure matches were going, make sure everything was okay, watch shots here, give out the medals when they won their medals, take photographs of it all. But it was a great event. It was super fun. I got lots of good feedback from all sorts of people.
That's cool. Are these mostly people that are around the area, or are people coming in
this was the state games for the Senior Olympics. So this was senior citizens over 50 was what the consideration was. So senior citizens from all over the state. A lot of surprises. There was a lady in the women's bracket who, I think she was 81 years old, and she played some of the best safeties I've ever seen. It was wild. I couldn't believe that I didn't know who she was. She played this replacement ball safety behind an 8 ball where she moved her opponent's ball out, put the cue ball there, and left the 8 ball intact, and it took perfect touch. Yeah, it was super fun. It was neat to meet everybody, and that's, pool is my natural habitat. I'm an animal that belongs in pool rooms, and so I'm never happier than when I'm talking about cues and fixing cues and teaching people to play and playing games and having fun, So it was a good time.
Yeah, that's cool. That's one thing that's amazing about the sport is you can keep playing forever. You could keep improving basically as long as you want.
As long as you're willing to put in the work. Absolutely. So it's definitely a lifelong path,
Well, throughout your journey, you have probably developed a lot of tips and strategies that have helped, your students and stuff like that. What's the one thing that improved your game the most?
Well, first of all, Randy Gottlicker. I mean, taking lessons with Randy, the decision to take lessons with Randy, go out to Texas and learn from him absolutely changed my life. And in that, at that same time was the decision that I was going to take responsibility for improving my game, that I was going to actually address problems that I have and work on those problems, learn to do those things better, and look at it from multiple points of view, read all sorts of pool books. And it's not that I'm expecting to learn some new thing, but it's interesting to hear the way somebody describes that problem from their point of view. And sometimes you'll learn something just because you're looking at it from a different angle. You'll learn a new way of seeing it that makes it so that it's much clearer.
What's the one thing, if you can think of a story that's improved one of your students' games the most, like something that's been really impactful for one of your students, something that comes to mind?
I have this interaction with people fairly often where we'll be practicing and they'll say something like, I usually make that shot. And the thing about it is that we can't be attached to the ideas about ourselves that we build. So I'll stop and I'll say, okay. And I'll clear the balls off the table. We might be in the middle of a game. I'll be like, let's try this. And we'll set the shot up again. And we'll see if they usually make it. And set it up again and see if they usually make it. Until they realize that it's possible that the memory of having made it once or twice is very strong, but they've forgotten the thousands of times that they've missed it. And then we can go and talk about, is this shot a useful shot to be shooting, or should we see a different situation there, right? It's that taking responsibility thing. When you're playing pool, you need to take responsibility to keep yourself in reality and not hide from your problems, and also not, live in these illusions about, I make half my bank shots. Yeah, sure you do. or or I always make a ball on the break. People have these ideas about themselves that get in the way of them actually putting in the work that they need to do.
And being grounded in reality gives you that heightened sense of confidence. Even if you might not be the best player, you could still play within your skills. You could still know what the probabilities are, so you can use that to your advantage.
Absolutely.
Beat people that you probably shouldn't. Like, you can play better than a lot of people.
Yeah, play your game and play and keep them in your game. Yeah.
So the new T-shirt for Garrett is, "Don't hide from your problems, just hide the cue ball."
Yeah, safety's wonderful, isn't it? I actually love safeties as a part of the game, because nothing else in pool says anything about your opponent. You running out balls doesn't say anything about your opponent. They could be the best player in the world, and as long as you're running out balls, they're still the best player in the world. But if you play a safety that they can't get out of, then it's the equivalent of you punching them in the face. You've said, you can't do this. And you might be right. That might be a hole in their game. And sometimes a safety can be, for a low-level player playing in league, a safety can be as simple. It doesn't have to be Fort Knox, right? It can be as simple as leaving the cue ball at the other end of the table. And if you're playing another 2, that's safe enough, right? Whether it's safe or not isn't whether a professional can get out of it. It's whether your opponent can get out of it. And it's really what you're saying about them, As I always think it's funny when people avoid safeties, because I think it's one of the most confrontational parts of the game.
Especially in bars.
Well, I mean, not that it starts confrontation, because everybody loves me. I'm universally loved.
Gage in league played so many on a guy, he just walked away. That was the end of it. He just walked away. It's like, I can't do this. He had never seen anything like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be kind of a trip when you're used to playing more in a more casual environment, and then you go into a more competitive environment and start to see higher level strategies. It can be mind opening.
Yeah, for sure.
Checkers to chess, man.
And also that thing where you want to believe that you never make any mistakes, and a safety can show you that cognitive dissonance between who you think you are as a player and who your opponent is showing you are as a player can be very rough for people.
Is that your hidden gem?
I mean, there's so many things. I was thinking the other day, actually, I was watching, I forget which tournament it was, but I was watching one of the tournaments. I spend a lot of time watching pool, and I was noticing the way that many professional players don't have an effective pre-match warm-up method. If you watch most professional players play, they'll usually break a rack of balls, they'll start to run out, they'll miss a shot, and they'll try that shot 3 or 4 times. And that's not the time to learn that shot. It's also not the time to doodle around the pool table. They've probably been doodling around the pool table all day. And so I was thinking that it would be really useful, and so this is the thing I've been working on recently, is to create a series of maybe 5 shots or 6 shots that give you a gauge for how fast the table's moving, how elastic the balls are. So, how much motion you're going to get with the cue ball off the balls, how the rails are feeling, and, 3 rail position, 2 rail position, coming across the table. So just these standard shots where you shoot them before every match. And because you're used to shooting those shots, it helps you gauge that table.
This is so good. I think one thing to stay in common with that is figure out what you can do in 5 minutes, figure out what you can do in 15 minutes, and figure out what you can do in a half an hour. I think that would be fantastic.
Having useful things to do.
Yeah.
I think that probably if you surveyed professional players and top amateurs, I would think that probably 90% of the time they spend in pool rooms or at pool tables is wasted. They could probably get twice as much out of the time they're actually spending, or spend half as much time and be in exactly the same position that they're in now. Like and it's that by evaluating what they're doing with their time and whether or not it's useful, I think that they could improve faster.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I actually just published a video not too long ago on being more efficient at the pool table. So we'll put a link for that somewhere. And to your warm up, it's fascinating that you mentioned this, because I was just thinking about this other day and added 2 shots to my warm up routine that I saw Rodney Morris do in a tournament. And I was like, that's actually a really good shot to like test the rails and to like let your stroke out. And I've incorporated that into my warm up. So I'll have to show those to you.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of things that you can take or learn when you get to a table you don't know, whether it's, 3 rails and trying to figure out if it goes short or long. But Gage and I play on a table that I have trouble with, here in Denver, and he played on a little bit, and he's like, those rails are a different height than the other tables. And I'm just
right.
like,
And it can be completely, there can be something about it. There could be a temperature or humidity issue, because a pool table is covered with wool, right? The cloth is made of wool. And so if there's a higher level of humidity, the rails themselves, the cloth, when they stretch it and staple it underneath. So it has a certain tension. But if the humidity changes, for instance, let's say it was covered when it was dry, and so that cloth was tight, and then the humidity rises, now that cloth is going to loosen up because that wool is going to absorb the moisture. And now that cloth that had tension on that cushion is going to be actually slacker on the cushion than it was before. So the cushion is going to behave totally different. So you could be playing on a table that you're used to one way, and a small change can happen. And so it's important to be able to know that. There's a great Eddie Taylor story that may be apocryphal, but he was in a pool room, a tournament room. I think probably the Jansker Brothers tournament in Johnson City, Illinois, the Hustler Jamboree. And he had this 5-rail bank shot, and he let everybody try it. And then he bet them all that he could make it in like 5 tries or whatever. And while he was making this bet, he went over and opened the door next to the pool table. And he waited about 5 minutes taking bets. And by the time he shot the shot, the humidity level in the room had completely changed and the shot went. But before he opened the door, the shot wouldn't actually go. It's one of those things where we often are so involved in the environment that we're in, the people around, and that it's a party and we get to see people and we want to measure up in our peer group and we want people to like us, that we don't prepare ourselves adequately with, something like a routine that we can do before we start our match. Or another, interesting thing is, your diet, right? You're going to be in a pool room all day long. You're going to be there for 8 to 10 hours. And the menu on the bar is probably only going to be bar food. And you're going to be using tons of calories. You're going to be using tons of electrolytes. You're going to be doing all these things that are, by the end of the day, going to wear you down. And as you've seen in most pool rooms, when you go to a tournament, people are drinking beer at 11 in the morning, eating greasy food, and spending the entire time socializing with their friends instead of using that time, to make sure that they've got enough vitamins, got enough, blood sugar to compete in the next match.
all that affects your mental acumen. And I wanted to ask, what is it that you do or you recognize, or you give your students an idea of to stay calm in those high tension moments?
Absolutely. Not only just to stay calm, but, I tell people, make sure you bring snacks. Bring a backpack, have bananas, have granola bars, have, vitamin water powders that you can add, sports powders that you can add to a bottle of water that you buy from the bar. If you're going to behave like it's a sport, if you're going to take it seriously, and if you're going to be hard on yourself for losing, then you also need to give yourself every opportunity to win, if winning is your goal.
Do you coach your students on how to stay focused and calm over those high tension shots?
We talk about it, and we talk about breathing, and we talk about, taking time to make your experience at the pool table your place. A good story that I often remember and I tell people is, Mike Tyson, before his fights, would do the same thing every single time. And one of the things he would do is he'd eat a Snickers bar. It's not that he liked Snickers bars. It was just a routine that he had gotten into that was that a little blood sugar boost and some protein, and then he'd go out and fight. And when he went into the ring, it was like he was in his living room. That was his home. And for his opponents, when they got into the ring, they were at Mike Tyson's home. And that's the thing, is that when you're at the table, when you're having a match, if you don't have a glass of water next to you, if you're used to writing down notes, a notepad to take notes on what's going on so you can fix it later, if you didn't eat before the match because you didn't want to feel heavy in your stomach, so you waited too long before your last match and you didn't have a snack and you didn't get some fresh air, if you don't do all these things, it's unrealistic to expect great results. And so, I do talk to my students about being prepared, about getting sleep, about making sure that if you're going to compete, go to bed early the day before, wake up, have breakfast, get to the pool room and maybe take a little walk around outside so you can stretch your legs. If you want to behave like it's a serious sport, then it's important that you are responsible for that. That you take those ideas and you make them something that you do every time.
Yeah, tournaments are such an endurance test that you really need to rely on routines to get through it. You have to be eating well, sleeping well. I like to meditate quite a bit, that I've mentioned before.
And it's such a great thing to do that in a hotel, to have a healthy quality life at some pool room or a hotel somewhere.
It can be really challenging. Yeah. I've had to keep food in my car because you're not allowed to bring outside food, like into a pool hall, for instance. So there's various tips and tricks, but I make it work.
I was watching a match once many years ago, and it was Earl Strickland and Landon Shuffett. And I was watching it because I wanted to see Landon Shuffett play, and I thought it was an interesting situation. But in the camera view behind them was Jason Shaw, and you could see his chair where he was sitting during playing a match. And at one point during the match, I had it on my big screen TV. He bends down and he unzips his jump cue bag, his big pocket on his pool cue bag, and he unzips it, and a bunch of bananas fall out of the pocket. Right, there's like 3 or 4 bananas. One of them, they fall out, and he stuffs all of them, but one back in and zips it back up and eats a banana. And I was sitting there watching it, and I'm like, that's an actual professional pool player. He could tell that he was getting low blood sugar and he wasn't thinking well. And so he got himself some potassium and some blood sugar so that he could play the match well. And things like that, like little moments like that, are things that if you can do that consistently, you're not like the other players in the room.
That's the real hidden gem.
Yeah.
If you want to be good, eat bananas. Well, let's get into some more fun questions. What's the weirdest advice that you've ever gotten?
I've gotten a lot of weird advice because I like to go to random places. I'll travel and just walk into some bar and play. And I love doing that. And I'll listen to whatever some old person wants to tell me. And one of my favorites that I've heard a few times is to aim by the reflection of the light on the ball. And I can't even begin to list all the reasons why that couldn't possibly work, but I love when people tell me and then try to show me. It's fantastic.
I wonder what they'd say if they played with one of those perimeter lights.
Right. And it assumes that the light is centered over the table. It assumes that the light is in some way corresponds to the 6 pockets on the table that may not even be true to the lights, right? The lights could be tilted to one side or the other. Where you're standing, the reflection is going to change.
I guess you're going to go ahead and make that light motionless when your player ends up missing a shot and the clang hits the light. And now it's moving on the cue ball and the other object balls are like...
It's an odd one. But I've heard it several times, so that's got to be the weirdest.
Hey, if you could play a match against or with anybody, living or deceased in history, or even somebody today, who would that be?
I think probably Don Willis, who was I think he was from like Canton, Ohio. They called him the Cincinnati Kid.
Yeah.
He was Luther Lassiter's road partner. And the story I heard about how they met was he was walked into a pool room and watched Luther play a guy for 2 or 3 hours and figured there was and without missing a ball. And he figured this guy's good enough to beat me, so I guess he's good enough to hang out with me. But Don was famous for weird proposition bets. I mean, he had a million. There's tons of stories about Don. And he was a top level, pro level player. He didn't play in tournaments very often, but he had all these crazy things that he could win money from people at. There's stories that he saw a dead possum in the middle of the road driving to the pool room, and he had run into a farmer that had a dead cow, and he told the farmer he could make some money if he could move the cow to where the possum was. So they're driving into town. They see the possum. He swerves, makes a big motion of swerving out of the road of the dead possum. And then they get to the bar, and the person at the bar, he's like, "What took you so long?" He's like, "Oh, it was terrible driving. We saw this dead cow in the middle of the road." And the guy who's driving with goes, "That wasn't a cow. That was a possum." And he goes, "No, I'll bet you $100 it was a cow." By that time, the farmer had moved the cow into the road where the possum was. And they drove back, and there's a dead cow in the middle of the road. He had a ton of things like that. He had one where he moved a road sign. He moved the city limits sign, like a half a mile too close to town, and then told the people at the bar that their city limits sign wasn't in the right distance from town. The guy had a thousand ways to take your money, and he was also a top level pool player. And so I think it would have been fun to hear stories from him. And it's interesting, he was inducted into the Canton, Ohio Sports Hall of Fame. And their description of him is a successful dad, who raised his family and was always there for everybody in the community. And it's not the kind of thing you usually hear about a guy who is one of the most legendary hustlers in our sport.
There was a movie called Cincinnati Kid.
Yeah.
Would that have any basis on him? Or?
I think that they named it after, because they'd heard of him probably, but Don was one of something else.
I want to hear, what's your most embarrassing moment, either during a pool match or instruction or anything?
I used to go out with my grandfather to play pool. He started developing Alzheimer's in his old age. And so to give my grandmother a break, I'd take him to the pool room because he grew up playing pool, and we didn't really play much together until I was an adult, until I would do this. And we'd go out and play, and it was awesome. It was super fun because we'd play straight pool, and I'd run 20 or 30 balls, and he couldn't believe it. And he didn't know who I was. So he'd ask me, he's like, "Do I owe you money? Do we know each other?" And I'd be like, "I'm your grandson." And he'd be like, "You're my grandson. We should go on the road." He was like so impressed and couldn't believe that I was his grandson. But one time we were at a place here in town, and it was him and me, and the place is pretty empty. But he's an older guy, and he expects people he's with to behave in a certain way. And they had glass shades over the table, these green glass shades over the table. And at home, where I'd been practicing, and this was like one of the first times we'd gone out together, and I didn't have a light over my table, and I had gotten into the habit of breaking and raising my hand up in the air. I don't know why. This was years and years ago, and it was just this weird thing that I started doing. And the first time I broke the balls, I shattered the pool light over the table.
Oh.
And there's glass everywhere. My grandmother's looking at me like, "Who is this weirdo? Where am I?" He couldn't even, he wanted to run out the door, I'm sure. He couldn't even believe it. And so I apologized. And, the bright side is he didn't remember it a week later, so it was fine.
Well, let's roll some really quick questions for you, some rapid fire stuff. Cue sticks, wood or carbon fiber?
I play with a carbon fiber shaft.
How about glove or bare hand?
I use a glove, but I don't have to.
Yeah. 8-ball or 9-ball?
Straight pool.
There you go. I like that.
Nice.
Bar table, full size?
Both. They're fun for different reasons.
Tournaments versus league?
Solo practice.
Okay. Play the worst pool of your life and win, or play the best pool of your life and lose?
The best pool of my life.
There you go.
Absolutely. And I'll probably play the best pool of my life when no one's there, when I'm by myself on my table.
That's what your
You
camera's
know,
for, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
keep
not probably
recording.
no one's going to see it.
All right. Well, to wrap it up, I got one more question. What's one piece of advice that you would give to anyone trying to improve their pool game?
I would say that you need to be very aware of what you're looking at each step of the process. You know, a lot of times you can ask people when they're shooting a ball, you can say, so where were you looking when you shot that ball? And they're like, over there. You need to be specifically looking at specific things throughout the process. Your eye pattern, as you drop into the shot, there's a parallax between the cue ball and the object ball that's going to help you to see whether you're aligned with the shot. As you're doing your practice strokes, you probably want to be looking at that cue ball so that you can see if your practice strokes are where you think they are and if your stroke is nice and straight. As you're pocketing the ball, you need to make that transition from the cue ball to the object ball. You need to be aware of what you're looking at. This is a visual targeting game, and you can shoot the ball in many different ways, and you can stand in many different ways, but you need to be aware of what you're looking at.
It's like a quote from Bob Fancher's The Pleasures of Small Motion. Get your head in your body and your body in the game.
Yep.
As an amateur player, sub 500 Fargo, I always wonder about where is that line of go or no go? Play it or play safe? Is there a percentage that, there's a shot I make 70% of the time, so I'm going to go for it, or it's a shot I make 55% of the time, so I go for it? I mean, where do you coach people on being at that go or no go spot where you're going to play it safe versus going for it?
So I coach people to make things have fewer consequences for them. So you can make either choice, and you can make either choice for several reasons. You can feel like, I'm having a day where I'd like to play some safeties. I'd like to do that, and I'm working on that. So I'm going to play safeties, even if it's not advised, right? This is not the World Championship. This is you playing a local tournament. This is you playing in your league night on APA. That's a substrate for you to develop your game further. And then, if you're working on pocketing balls, then, and you're working on being more accurate, then committing to firing in those hard shots matters, because you do need to make hard shots too. So it depends on what situation you're in, and you need to be clear with yourself about what situation you're in. You don't want to be playing a safety because you're scared, but telling yourself you're playing a safety because you think it's the right shot, right?
Yeah, interesting.
If you're scared, that's fine, but make sure to play the safety right. Play the safety aggressive, play the safety to maximize all the parts of the safety. Walk over, look at the place where you want the cue ball and think, do I need this cue ball frozen to that ball? How much leeway do I have to make this Fort Knox? And not just, I'm going to play the safety and I'm going to send the ball over there. Over there is not a place. And if you're going to make the shot, fully commit to making the shot. And if you miss the shot, know that you rolled the dice and that's part of the game and it's fun. And you're allowed to miss. I tell my students and teammates, I say, listen, I've missed 1 million shots in my life, and my only hope is that I get to miss 1 million more.
There you go.
Yeah.
This has been great. This has been great, Gary. I really appreciate it. I want you to remind us again where and how people can find you.
Probably through the PBIA website. It's playbettabilliards.com. I have a profile on there in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I have a website, santafebilliards.com. That's about it. I don't do much social media or advertising or anything like that. I'm, super busy with pool and with life in general. So it's not like I am doing, big lessons out of town or anything like that.
And Santa Fe is such an interesting, very historical, artsy type of town. So
it's 400 years old.
If you're in the New Mexico area, then I encourage you to check it out. And we'll have links to all those in the description below. Thanks for joining us, Garrett. It's been great.
Yeah,
it's been fantastic. I certainly hope a lot of people watch this and leave their questions and comments on the YouTube page. Like it, subscribe to it, and share this podcast, because this was really fantastic. Thank you very much, Garrett.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, and thanks for everyone that joined in and listening or watching. Keep practicing, and may all your shots be on target.